We begin with their phone call. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed a phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and he said that Putin is ready to begin peace talks over Ukraine. In a social media post, Trump said both leaders would tell their teams to begin negotiations right away. The two presidents reportedly plan to meet in person. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that he has spoken with President Trump, later posting on X that nobody wants peace more than Ukraine. Well, for more, I'm joined now by our correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Nick, good to see you. So, U.S. President Trump says that Russian President Putin has agreed to begin negotiations to end the war in Ukraine immediately. What does this mean for the people where you are in Ukraine?
Brent, I think lots of Ukrainians winced when they saw that post from Trump, where there was no mention of who is the aggressor in this, who is the victim of Russia's invasion. Just lots of fairly gushing praise for Putin, of Putin having used Trump's phrase common sense, of former US-Russian ties, of memories of the Second World War and fighting a common enemy. That all will have gone down very, very badly here, but I think it was expected. I think the hope here in Kyiv is that this is just Trump's opening gambit, that he is trying to get his negotiating counterpart, his vis-a-vis, on side, and that he will then move to asking Putin to do more difficult things. But certainly this is a very unsettling kind of image, and people here are acutely aware of the track record there of Trump's previous engagements with Putin in his first presidency, how he told the press that he believed Putin over US intelligence agencies. So there is a lot of concern tonight.
Yeah, the impression is Russia and the United States are talking about Ukraine and not with the Ukrainians, though we did hear that Trump did speak with Ukrainian President Zelensky for about an hour or so. That's what the report was. Do we know how did that conversation go?
So we got quite a polite, pretty formulaic readout in terms of what they spoke about from the Ukrainian side, with the Ukrainian side stressing that Ukraine was open to dialogue, open to finding peace, also had other things to offer the US, notably resources, these rare earth metals. We had a US delegation in town today, talk just about that. I think there is a kind of awareness here that this is going to be about the blame game. From a Ukrainian perspective, they are convinced that Putin is not going to budge and that eventually Trump will have to turn up the screws on Russia to get a solution, and they don't want to be blamed for those talks failing. So for now, they're playing along. They are not being difficult publicly, at least, and are playing along and flattering Trump and his team any way they can.
And Nick, we understand that both of these presidents, Putin and Trump, say that they want to visit each other. I mean, are we looking at a rapprochement here, a reset of relations happening on the back of the Ukrainians?
Well, potentially not just the Ukrainians, but also all of Europe. We had a speech from President Zelensky just a couple of weeks ago at Davos where he said just that Europe risks being basically overtaken by discussions happening between Washington, Moscow, and maybe even Beijing, and that Europe needed to do more to actually be at the center of these discussions and to ensure that things weren't decided over their backs. Certainly, Vladimir Putin would like nothing more than to basically have a kind of Potsdam Yalta Agreement 2.0, like after the Second World War, where spheres of influence were carved up without asking the people in those spheres of influence. Trump seemingly, as someone who has talked about annexing Greenland, Panama, the countries, doesn't seem particularly, in terms of values, turned off or kind of averse to that idea. So there is a real worry. But I think there is also grounds for optimism in Ukraine. After all, President Zelensky has dealt with Trump before in that first presidency. He got out relatively well from that first encounter about Hunter Biden and the impeachment that happened later. So there is a kind of hope here that they can engage in some brinkmanship. They are flattering the Trump team, but also they are aware they might have to escalate, do some brinksmanship, because Trump, after all, also respects strength and will react if the Ukrainians stand up for themselves. That is the hope. They don't have many other options right now.
That's right. Flattery gets you only so far. Our correspondent Nick Connolly with the latest tonight from Kyiv. Nick, as always, thank you.
And from Nick Connolly in Kyiv, let's go now to Washington, D.C., where I'm joined by our correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber. Benjamin, so President Trump is taking his first steps to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible. At whose expense?
So it is significant that President Trump spoke to the Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky after this lengthy phone call with Vladimir Putin, breaking a year-long silence between the Oval Office and the Kremlin. And when it comes to these negotiations, it's crucial to see who will be sitting in the table and who won't. So it's not surprising that reacting to this post by the US president, top European diplomats immediately warned that these high-stake negotiations must include Ukraine. It is not clear where these talks between Trump and Putin might happen, if it's one, if it's several. You just mentioned Saudi Arabia, where this might happen. So it's not quite clear how this would happen and what's the position from the US, because there's so many players involved here on the US side. We have on one side Defense Secretary Hegseth with those comments in Brussels, closing the door, you could say, to a NATO membership for Kyiv, also saying that there won't be a return to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders, saying that it's unrealistic. You also have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who along with Vice President J.D. Vance will meet Ukrainian President Zelensky in Germany on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference that will happen on Friday. And then also you have the Secretary of the Treasury who met Zelensky in Kyiv to get assurances on access to Ukraine's rare earth elements, oil and gas. But one man who's notably absent from all of these conversations and also from the post of the US president is the man that was supposed to actually work on a peace plan as Trump's envoy for Ukraine and Russia, and that's retired General Keith Kellogg.
Hey, you paint that picture of so many moving pieces here, Benjamin. Let's go back to US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who said in that meeting in Brussels that he considers Ukraine's accession to NATO unrealistic. That Europeans must ensure Ukraine's security themselves. It's not a new position, but how has that been received?
It is indeed not a new position, and his remarks could be considered as saying the quiet part out loud. It's something that we've heard from several US officials over the last couple of weeks. For some, what is rather surprising are not the comments by Secretary Hegseth or the Trump administration's approach, but rather the stark change from the stance of the Biden administration, of course, declared that they would support Kyiv for as long as necessary. So while some might consider these comments surprising, what many are wondering now is how unprepared Europe is actually right now to respond, to be better prepared on what is happening of this new stance or approach from Washington. But those comments will indeed lead to a lot of heated, you could say, discussions in Europe over this new decision, over this new stance by the Trump administration here in Washington.
DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber in Washington, thanks so much.